All right, everybody. Episode 1, Genesis 1. So I have my trusty notes here on my talking points, and yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So, Genesis 1, the very opening of the Bible. I don't think anyone's unfamiliar with just the idea of Genesis 1. I believe the most common verse everybody obviously remembers and recognizes is, God saying, "Let there be light," which some people have interpreted as figurative. Some people have interpreted as the idea of even possibly announcing the Big Bang. I'm not really going to cover that topic in this exact video. What I'm going to cover is the interesting points I find through Genesis 1 and an overall feeling. So this is going to be essentially a theological discussion. So let's go over the days. So day 1, God creates earth and the heavens. I have a fun note here. The heavens is plural, and we'll go over the Hebrew word for that in a little bit. So earth primarily was day 1. So God says that the earth was formless and void. Now, the words in Hebrew for formless and void are very close to each other. Formless is tohu, and void is bohu. So Tohu means to lie waste, and Bohu means to be empty. So it's interesting, I would say, notes on what Earth would have looked like before we know it today. I would easily say it's quite perplexing to figure out exactly what that would have looked like. And most likely, I would have imagined, based on the words for formless and void and how we use them in the English language, I would have to posit that it most likely was just an empty rock. It was some form of essentially blank canvas of rock or essentially nothingness that God chose to start existence. So, existence of creation, not existence of creator. So, yeah, very, very fascinating to me, just the idea that at one point there was literally nothing here. Whether you actually believe theologically this is meant to be literal or if you mean it to be figurative, either way, at some point the earth was not here, now it is. Very fascinating. So, day 2, he creates heaven. Now, the word for heaven in Hebrew used in the Bible is shawmayim, which just means sky. So he separates land and water, or I'm sorry, land, water, and sky water, which I find very interesting. This is where we see a lot of these separating the firmaments, the classic debate that can also be very hilariously seen on the television show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But creates essentially the sky and separates, water and land and sky and land. But uses the term heaven, which I will make an interesting posit that I think will create a very fun debate between you and other viewers, as well as you and myself possibly. So day 3 separates seas and makes vegetation. It is very interesting. The wording is somewhat strategic in that he created vegetation and it brought forth from the earth. However, not necessarily in yield. And we'll actually see more of this in Genesis 2. However, we're just covering Genesis 1 in this video. So, interesting thoughts and ideas go there. So day 4, though, creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. So essentially the universe as we see it. So the stars, they actually give us the ability, all three combined, to create the seasonal calendar. God even says that this is essentially our way to learn and measure time, which is fascinating because it's not just day and night time, it's all time, essentially an entire calendar. So he allowed us this ability from the start, which is quite fascinating. So day 5, we see that he created fish and birds. Now, I do have a very interesting note on the idea of fish, because in the very next verse, after he says that he creates, fish, every creature in the sea and every bird in the sky, the word for one of the fish mentioned in the very next verse is taneen, which actually means sea dragon or sea serpent, and sometimes interpreted as whale. I find this a very unique word choice by God, simply because what could that mean? What could that even be? What type of sea dragon? I'm not a seafaring individual. I'm quite landlocked. However, I've been on cruise ships, I've been on the Atlantic, I've been in the Mediterranean, and this is fascinating to me. It's just the perplexity on what kind of creature would that have been. Obviously, paleontology would say that there was many massive sea creatures throughout every type of period. Triassic, Cretaceous, everything like that, in which we would have seen a lot. If, of course, any of paleontology is correct, it's very hard to know because we weren't there. So all I know is God began creation, and we're gonna follow that suit. So, sea serpent, very interesting. Sea dragon, very interesting. What creatures could this possibly have mean, and are they still alive today? So, very interesting. If it is a whale, obviously we do know that whales are alive today. So, that's more heartening. I would much rather see a whale than something called a sea dragon. That sounds terrifying. So, moving on to day six. Day six is the seminal day of creation in terms of that's where we come about. So mammals, we have mammals and human beings. We also have insects, and I would say it's healthily assumed that also reptiles at this point were also created, most likely reptiles, amphibians, things like that. So he also gave us to provision on day six and essentially basic instruction that vegetation and mammals are food, as well as fish and birds. Essentially, almost all living things are some form of sustenance for mankind. And it's easily logically deduced that this would also create a system of sustenance for all creation. So essentially telling us that there's now been a hierarchy created on who feeds upon who or what. So humans come about on this day, and we see this a lot more in detail as to what happens in Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is often misunderstood as following the events of Genesis 1, and it's actually essentially a deeper interpretation and segmented view on the creation process that God undertook in Genesis 1. So that I find just very, very fascinating. This is also where we get the famous verse of God creating mankind in his own image. And I'll actually be doing a separate video on that after this video. Because there's a lot of theological theories and a lot of philosophical interpretations on how and what that might mean. And I have my clear choice, and I would like to posit all of that to you. So the final thing I want to talk about in terms of just my notes is that God, at the end of his creations, saw that it was good. Now, the word saw, now I'll be darned, I did not write down for some reason the Hebrew word for saw, and it is escaping my mind as of right now. I apologize, but God saw that his creation was good. Now, the word saw used does translate, remember this, does translate roughly to recognition, the understanding that he recognized his work as good. This brings up a huge topic of debate onto exactly what this might mean. There is the obvious English version of the word saw that we use today, which obviously has different meaning than the Hebrew word did a little bit, which is not a mistranslation or anything like that. It's simply that we just have to understand how language is actually used to truly get a good grasp on the word of God. So how we use saw in English, obviously, if I were to step back after creating some sort of doodad or gadget, and I liked what I saw and it functioned the way I want, I would say, oh, I see that's good. However, that implies that I was unaware of its inherent goodness until I was finished. So the word in Hebrew that translates to recognize more implies that it was just a recognition, almost like as if a declaration of sorts. Not that God was unaware of the goodness of it, but simply just making a declaration between himself. We do see the word God throughout Genesis used not only singularly, but also in plural senses when referring to himself. And this, I would say, is also clear indication, which we will cover much later in the series, on the idea of a triune Godhead, or known as the Holy Trinity, most commonly referred to today in most English speaking and in most religious senses, general to both Protestants and Catholics. So the idea saw, though, we'll go back to that. this is a fascinating thing. And this is something I'll pause on. I'll probably do another video on it later, but just for the sake of this episode, I'm going to just go into this. This will cover more philosophy side of things than necessarily the pure theological, but all thought is worth merit. So the idea of perfection. Many people would view today's world rampant with disease, politics, war, various strife, areas of the planet that seem to be uninhabitable, areas of the planet that seem to be far too over inhabited. All these do bring about strong feelings on the world. But I actually posit to you, and I make this thought and sentiment with full sincerity, I promise you, that Earth and existence of the universe as it is the most perfect form of existence that could be, in terms of even viewing everything down to the laws of physics, biology, chemistry, geology, all facets of science that we can know and prove and observe, that they were all created exactly as they were supposed to be. We see no mention of the idea of disease. We see no mention of the idea of famine in the actual creation events, meaning these situations simply were not at the time of creation. So the fact that he saw his creation was very good. He recognized its perfection and its idealistic views. So, however, I maintain these are not idealistic, these are factual views. The fact that mankind, as it existed upon day 6, Earth was exactly as it was supposed to be. Now, of course, we're not going to cover the fall of man, mentioned in Genesis 3, and then onward until the very end of the Bible, and the very end of human history. I protest. So that will be for a later video, the 3rd episode. So the idea that the creation is perfect. Now, everybody has, of course, had wishes, and this might be a little, topsy turvy in my definitions. So please bear with me. I would appreciate that. Everybody has had thoughts of, I wish I could fly. I wish I could, never get sick. I wish I could, change things or move things easier with ease. I wish gravity felt less. I wish, my organs or spine was shaped differently. Various things, whether they're deemed humorous or not, that's up to you. I don't actually mean them in a humorous sense, despite my slight chuckle, but everybody has ideas on how they think things would be better. Now, in today's sense, most of that ends up being more politically and somewhat medical than truly philosophical or theological. But I somewhat digress from those things and actually revert back to the idea that disease effectively was created by us. Nature has its own elimination process and balancing process, yes, but I would ask you to try to understand the idea that disease is a malfunction of these things. They operate perfectly when left to their own devices. Mankind has essentially created some sort of system of illness, whether it's simply not taking care of oneself, not doing one's due diligence in maintaining their bodies, any degrees. Now, of course, this does not mean that someone is at fault directly for the idea of being sick. That is not the case, and I do not believe that to be true. Illnesses happen. Unfortunately, in today's world, they're extremely common. It's unheard of for someone to have never had an illness, or whether chronic or not. So, but to understand that a lot of mechanisms that we deal with today were not around during creation. So, even though you may have your thoughts such as, I wish I could fly, I wish I lived longer, I wish I had such and such, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, whichever terms you prefer to use, I would venture strongly that those all would have repercussions that are not meant to happen to mankind, which is why God created Earth and the universe as he did, that they are actually perfect, and when functioned properly, okay, without any malusages, any misunderstandings, misinterpretations, that they actually operate exactly as they were supposed to. And I posit this because if God, a perfect being, sees something as very good, that doesn't come with a degree of such. It comes with a factual statement of, "'Tis good. It is good. Therefore, it is like him. It is perfect in its nature." Now, he doesn't use the word perfect because God needs no maintenance. Earth does need maintenance. So I would say this is the reason why God did not use the word perfect. But the idea that every law that exists, every rule of function that exists throughout the universe, down to the smallest subatomic particle that we could possibly imagine or think of, all the way to the largest of ecostructures that occurs throughout the universe, as well as the universe itself, was built and intended for maintenance exactly as it was supposed to be done. It is us who have altered things and essentially messed things up. Once again, not saying that the victim of a disease is responsible for that. This is an unfortunate side effect of disease, and my prayers and thoughts go to people who are afflicted by illnesses. I myself have my own, albeit minor, so I'm very blessed and thankful for that. However, disease occurs, and of course it is not the fault of the victim, so we don't want to be victim shaming or blaming and walking around saying it's someone's fault for having things such as cancer. These are just unfortunate side effects of humanity and things we have to deal with. Granted, God did not create them. He does use them for his glory, and he uses them for the blessings, mercy, and grace of all mankind. So those are my ideas and thoughts in general. I'd like to leave you with the idea that the reason I feel God tells us how creation came about and his ideas through creation and essentially his thought process, as it were, has nothing to do with the idea of authority, but has everything to do with the idea of pure benevolence. God does not need creation. God is a creator by his nature because he has decided that he is that by his own nature. He does not need us. We offer no direct benefit. What we offer is essentially servitude. We offer a chance for him to share love, being also a being of love himself. We offer the chance to share love with him. When a parent has a child, it is intended and supposed to be this way, that parent sees that child as a piece of them and loves them and trains them up and raises them and communes with them and shows them the ways of life and reality as it is. So this was the wish of God. This was the hope of God. And God chose to reveal his story of creation, not in a show of this is simply how it is, but in a show of I have so much love to give that I must create to share my love with that. And then that will see my love and share it back with me. When someone loves their family, they want to spend more time with them. When someone loves their wife, they want to create more family with them. They want to commune and be one and multiply for the very purpose of sharing love and experience and communion and all manners of intimacy and relationships. So this is a natural facet of God himself, being omnibenevolent. Pardon my misspeaking there. I trip over my tongue sometimes. But so I urge you to view this not as an authority or a simple instruction on how he did it. He has no need to tell us of that, outside of the sheer fact that he gave us life and creation as a sign of love. This is a pure love. Even though he enacted his creator side, he enacted his desire and wish for even greater love than even he has, which he has all of love. So he simply wished to maintain that level of love across all of creation, therefore deciding to create. Granted, I didn't speak as eloquently as I had hoped I would on that matter, but take it as you will. These are my thoughts on Genesis 1. I'd love to hear other things. There's plenty of things throughout the chapter of Genesis 1 that I did not mention. Please comment them below. I'd love to engage in discussions, theological, philosophical, even if you feel you have different beliefs. Please let me know them. I do my research. I consult my concordances in Hebrew and Greek and my Bible, various translations, all of which I feel are necessary. And I do my due diligence of prayer also in this process. So please like or comment or subscribe if you feel it's necessary for yourself, and look forward to more episodes. So I bid you adieu, and I will see you guys in the next episode.